So my name is Christine Gonzalez. I am doing my final project on the American Revolutionary War. It is the typical history unit for 5th grade in the state of California. So I wanted to take a look at that and see what books we could find to help supplement that curriculum. The first book that I read is Can't You Make Them Behave, King George? This one was interesting because it's written from the perspective of King George. Most of the books on the Revolutionary War are written from the perspective of the American colonists. This one is from the perspective of folks in England. It's more humorous, it's kind of silly. Essentially, they're just asking, King George, why can't you make these colonists behave? And he's saying, hey, I just want them to pay some taxes. I just want them to help us get out of debt. I don't understand what their problem is. The pictures are very cartoonish. It's written in kind of a witty fashion. It's just something from a different perspective. It's good for helping to identify key members that are important during the Revolutionary War, and also to help instill the events of what led up to the Revolutionary War. The next book that I read was called George versus George, The American Revolution is Seen from Both Sides. And this book was about George Washington and about King George. And it does compare them some. They were both quite tall. They were over 6 foot tall, whereas the average height was about 5'7". They both powdered their hair to be white or wore powdered wigs. Both of them liked to dress fairly modestly. They didn't care for all of the lace and frills that were so in style at the time. This book asks the question, was King George a royal brute, or was he just trying to make things work with America? Was George Washington actually the father of our nation, or was he more of a tyrant and a troublemaker? There's really not a lot of good guys versus bad guys in this book. It doesn't depict one side as being better than the other. It kind of just introduces the information to the reader and allows them to make that assumption for themselves. This book is for about 8 to 10-year-olds. I'd say it would be about average for the 5th grade level, whereas the book Can't You Make Them Behave, King George, would be maybe a little lower, but also in the average range. This book, with the two Georges, also has a lot of the writing is in thought bubbles. It's not necessarily narrated, but it's their thoughts and their opinions just kind of coming out of the side of their head. The next book I wrote was called Dear America, Winter of the Red Snow, A Revolutionary Diary of Abigail Jane Stewart. This is for probably the more advanced reader in 5th grade, maybe ages 9 to 12, I would say. It's a fictional diary of an 11-year-old girl during the Revolutionary War. It talks about what she saw. At first she was curious about the soldiers, and then she did witness some whippings and some hangings, and she was angry at the soldiers, and then at times she saw them wounded and she felt bad for the soldiers. There is some violence in the book. While she didn't witness any actual battles, she did witness the whippings and the hangings. She went to a hospital and saw a trough of hands and feet that had been amputated. It depicts a scene where she sees the soldiers marching through the snow barefoot, leaving bloody footprints in the snow. So there are some disturbing factors that may bother some kids, but it is slightly watered down to where it's still appropriate for kids. It talks about, some of the family life and chores and regular things that people did during the Revolutionary War. For the most part, it's a positive book, but it does talk about disease and some of the casualties of war also. So it does, throw some more truth into it. And the next book was Mr. Revere and I, an account of certain episodes in the career of Paul Revere as revealed by his horse. This one's interesting because it's written from the perspective of Paul Revere's horse, who, as we all know, Paul Revere was the one that rode through, announcing that the British were coming. His horse was a member of she was a horse for the British Army, was taken to America and was done. She was retiring. They were sending her off to the glue factory, and she was saved by Samuel Adams, who then gave her to Paul Revere. Her name was Sherazade. They called her Sherry for short. The book has some illustrations, mostly pen and ink, and it also has a map that shows Paul Revere's route on his infamous night. And also from the horse's perspective, it discusses some of the things that Paul Revere gave up in order to help the Sons of Liberty, family issues that he had and such. And so it was kind of an interesting take to see it from a horse's perspective. It's from ages 9 to 12, so it's about an average reading level for 5th grade, maybe a little advanced, but it's something that would be good to be read aloud to the class as opposed to individual reading. It does still capture their imagination since it is written from the horse's perspective. The final book that I read was If You Lived in the Time of the American Revolution. This is also for, I'd say 8 to 12. It talks about what started the war, what the different sides were, talks about some of the battles. Mostly it just depicts the daily life during the times of the Revolutionary War, chores that you did, places you went, people you saw. Did you witness battles? What side were you on? It gives it from multiple perspectives. It does show both sides perspectives, but it does favor the loyalists. So there is an agenda there. You know, war is bad. But for the most part, it does give good information on both sides, but it does favor one side more than the other.